My main motivation for today's stream was because I've been thinking a lot about documentation and how to do it well and how to mostly do it automatically so that, robots do it well for me. And one of the big benefits of having switched to TypeScript from JavaScript / Node is that a lot of documentation just sort of happens by virtue of writing code, and that comes to types in particular, and the shapes of APIs, what things return, all of that's good stuff. But there are parts of documentation and parts of APIs that need to be written for people, written with pros. And trying to figure out how to make that work is kind of what I've just been thinking about a lot. And so I was digging into tools around that, and the two things in particular that I wanted to dig into were a thing called TSDoc and a thing called Typedoc, which unfortunately sound like the same damn thing. So I just want to dig into those and try to use them on one of my projects. And so that's what we're gonna do today. So this project is available on Node. It's just a little repo that I made to sort of bundle up all of my convenience functions for TypeScript and types and things that I was finding to be really useful across projects or things taken from bigger, large libraries where I only wanted a function or two. And so could just take that instead of importing the whole library. So it's sort of a nice little portable module. If we go to, let's go to npm so we can get out to this package. So this thing is called bscotch/utility. This is the documentation we're dealing with. Currently, this is all manual-assed documentation, so this sucks. Every time I go add new stuff to it, I have to go in and also add manual documentation. The actual functions themselves are decently documented, and so the trouble I was having is there's this aspect of discovery with an API. So if somebody wants to use this, or if I want to use this library, and I import it, how do I find the stuff that's in there that I can use? So with good IntelliSense, with a tool like VSCode, in combination with TypeScript and all the right extensions, then you can just sort of start using it and then hit things like, if you're on Windows, was it Alt space, I think, something like that, and get your list of autocompletes. So then find the thing that sounds like what you want, right? But when you're not familiar with a library or the general stuff that's in that API, how do you find what you want? So if you ever used a really large library, like say the AWS SDK or something in Node, you'll find that it is just impossible to find the thing you want because you can't guess at the name, and so you can't even, it's just really hard. So I was trying to kind of help resolve that by just having the documentation available for all of the functions that are in this library. But it's really annoying. So I figured this was a good project since it does have documentation, it's intended to have documentation for every function that's in here. And it's very flat. It's a simple thing. There are no classes. It's just functions all exported in a flat structure. It should be very easy, if anything would be easy, to figure out how to apply an automated documentation where I can put docs alongside the actual code and have those all converted into a README that looks something like this, maybe not exactly like this, but where all the stuff is there and where I don't have to do all this extra work. Okay, so here we go. The things we're dealing with are a thing called TSDoc. So we'll start with that because it's kind of the root of it. So I found this when looking for basically the JSDoc equivalent for TypeScript. TypeScript is, as you frequently see it described, a superset of JavaScript that basically supplies static types. What does that mean? That means I'm going to declare that something is a string, or a number, or a string or a number, or a particular weird object with a particular shape, a set of key value pairs or whatever. That I can do that, and then because I have declared that, then now my tools, TypeScript, linters, other kinds of things, know what it is that thing is supposed to be. And so they can help me. They can do autocompletes. They can check for errors that I've made because I used a function that needs a string, but the thing I passed to it is probably not a string, that sort of thing. So since TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, and JavaScript uses primarily a thing called JSDoc to annotate it, where JSDoc's main goal actually is to provide type annotations. So a lot of what Typescript does by making a succinct programmatic way to define types sort of consumes most of the stuff that JSDoc is trying to do. That said, in a pinch, you can just use JSDoc to get a lot of the TypeScript-like functionality. So if you're in just plain old JavaScript and you annotate it well with JSDoc, if you're in some sort of an editor that knows about TypeScript and is using it, you actually basically get TypeScript features still. So you can get a long way with plain JavaScript and JSDoc for annotating your types and stuff. So with the change of TypeScript, now all of a sudden we don't have to worry about all that type annotation. So you can now use the remaining subset of JSDoc that's not about types. The question is, what does that even mean, and what tools support it? And the tools that are around for creating automatic documentation files and stuff are designed mostly around JSDoc, because that's what's been around for a long time. So that's also what I kind of been looking at, and I didn't see anything that felt appropriate for TypeScript. Most of the things about JSDoc can't pull type data out of your TypeScript, and so now you actually lose your type data in your documentation by using TypeScript and trying to annotate it with JSDoc. I figured there must be a way. There is, supposedly. We'll find out. Which is TSDoc. Exact same idea. You can see it's a proposed standard. It's backed by Microsoft, if I'm understanding all this correctly, because this is, you can see the package is maintained by Microsoft, which sounds good because so is TypeScript, so is VSCode, basically all the tools that I'm using here and that most people are using when they're using TypeScript. So seems like a good source, and they go through, they have, so they call these things tags. We'll start using them, but you can see this in this context. There's a particular syntax that indicates to your tools that a block of code is a TSDoc, a TypeScript documentation comment. So it looks like this. It's so if you're familiar with TypeScript, and this is true also in several other languages, that the /* and then / bracket multi-line comments. For JSDoc and TSDoc, if you add that second star right there, just right after that first one, then your tools that understand JSDoc or TSDoc, if you have tools that understand that, then that is the indicator to them that whatever's happening now between that start and end for this comment is going to be TSDocs or JSDocs. So then it can parse it and it can do stuff with it. So you can see it's just a simple, basic kind of ASCII. There's nothing interesting going on here. But then there are these tags that sort of conceptually provide annotated information, structural information. And if you structure your stuff in the right way using these tags, then JSDoc/TSDoc can pull that out, and then your tools can use that. So here you're seeing things like @params. This is saying I'm describing a parameter. And because they came in this order, that I'm describing them, the ones that should appear in that same order. And in JSDoc, you would put the type information here. In TSDoc, the type information is already down here, and so you only provide any other information you think is useful to add. So JSDoc, again, most of its tags have to do with annotating types. With TSDoc, now it's all the rest of this stuff, presumably plus some new things. You can see everything that they have down here, basically. It's the kind of stuff you'd want to use to now describe things, things that are now a little more human-friendly, things that refer to one function or class to another, things that tell us how we should treat a thing, whether it's deprecated. Do they have deprecated in here? Yes. Whether it's deprecated, in this case, it's just a remark. So it must be some sort of an aside, right? And so by having these sort of standard ways of describing things, then the tools can convert that into a standard format, some sort of probably a JSON document or something. And then additional tools can be used to convert that into an HTML document or Markdown or whatever. And so that's kind of the path that we're trying to take, is how do we annotate our stuff, and then what tools can we use to take those annotations, pull them out of the code, and convert them into human-friendly, always up-to-date documentation. There's just this general problem when it comes to your code that you write your code. Now you need tests for your code. That's actually just another form of documentation that also repeats information about your code. You also need to document the API for people so that they can read some human-friendly prose that describes how to think about it and use this thing. But that, again, is just kind of the code all over again, just in a different way. And so you have all these different ways that you need to represent what it is that you did, but they are not functionally coupled to each other. So if you change the code, you don't have to also change the test. Hopefully the test fails as a consequence, and so those are at least fairly coupled. But if you change, it's basically making it so that you need things to change at the same time as the end goal and minimize how many things are just broken because they're not coupled and you can edit one. The other one means the same thing or describes what it originally was, and you don't have to edit that at the same time. So that's TSDoc. That's kind of the overview. Again, the idea here is that we're not going to be trying to take the TSDoc standard, go through a set of code, start using it in that context, and see if we can convert that into documentation that's now coupled and human-friendly. So if we look at the rest of the thing, the documentation is pretty decent over here for TSDoc. They basically point out that there are all these other tools that have different interpretations of JSDoc or whatever, but the idea is that a whole bunch of things are making use of things like JSDoc and TSDoc, and so if there's some standard, that's very helpful, and their goal here is to set the standard for TSDoc. VSCode and Typedoc are kind of the two tools we're really focusing on here, but we also notice there's ESLint. So I'm not actually sure what the tool set is for things that are going to help us with TSDoc, and that's part of what we're trying to figure out here. So then we're kind of hoping here that between Typedoc and VSCode and then ESLint TSDoc plugin, that we'll have everything we need to make all of this work. So this one is now Typedoc. Super confusingly named because the only way you could actually keep track of which one is which is if you already know about JSDoc, so you can recognize TSDoc as basically parallel to that. So that in contrast, Typedoc must be the other thing. Typedoc is a thing that uses the documentation to uses your TSDoc comments to generate documentation. So that's what we're going to try to do. All right, so Typedoc. As it says, converts comments of TypeScript source code into HTML or JSON, whatever. So if it's JSON, then we can do with it whatever we please. If it's HTML, we don't have to do with it whatever we please. We can just type HTML, which would be nice. It was a CLI or node module, so if you're not that familiar with the node ecosystem, this is super common. NPM packages make it very easy to supply a CLI along with your command line interface, along with your code. So if you're going to package your code and deploy it, you can include some executables, and then Node, the node ecosystem through NPM, handles all the process of making sure that thing ends up being executable, even if somebody installs it on Linux or Windows or Mac. So what you'll often see is that, especially the really popular tools, have both CLI components and also raw code components where you can now import the code and make your own pipelines, where you're just your own tools built on top of the code itself instead of having to string together command line stuff through, say, bash scripts or something. So supposedly all we have to do is just install it and then run it. So I guess that's great. That's easy enough. Presumably there's some details here about how to make it do a good job. But one step at a time, right? Okay, and then finally we have ESLint plugin, TSDoc. So ESLint, if you're not familiar with the concept of a linter, but linting is the idea of sort of static checking, meaning just looking at your code in essence, of code to discover things that are probably problems. So it's different than like a compiler error or failing a test or whatever, because those are a little more functional, so it's a little bit higher level, trying to catch things before they hit those more downstream endpoints. So passing linter checks doesn't guarantee that you have good code. It's looking for things. So it's less checking the logic of the code than it is sort of the grammar, and that for simple things that would just be impossible to actually work. For example, cases where inside of your code, it would have always returned in some place that downstream code could never possibly execute, for example. So there are things like that that are detectable before you even compile it or run it. So that's kind of what linters are for. They can also be used for making your code look nice, because you can set all kinds of rules like, you can call it an error if your not using semicolons because JavaScript doesn't require semicolons. Or you can call it an error if there aren't enough, if there's not enough indentation. And then a linter for some of the rules can also auto fix things for you. I found recently that separating concerns of prettifying, making the code look nice, from looking for problems, like things that'll break the code, is really helpful and good practice. So you can just write your code and then allow an automatic formatter to make it look nice. So you just write hideous ass code and then run a thing that makes it look nice. And then you can reserve the use of your linter for finding actual problems. So ESLint is the thing for basically JavaScript and TypeScript. ES standing for ECMAScript, which is the sort of official real name of JavaScript. So let's see what this thing is doing. It's providing a rule for validating that TypeScript comments conform to the specification. Okay, that's nice. So this basically will allow ESLint to parse our TSDocs and then tell us if we're using them right. So I'm a tools first developer. I always get my tool set up because it prevents you from making mistakes and also helps you learn new stuff. Because a really good tool provides hints, prevents you from doing bad things, provides easy way to do the right things. So here's the project. I already kind of went through the npm page for this a little bit. So you saw the README, or at least the rendered version on npm. So again, the goal here is to take this thing and see if we can get most or all of it out of here and into the actual code, or otherwise use the code itself as the documentation, avoiding things that are pros that are not functional, because those are the things that can mutate and then become wrong because they're not functional. It's basically, the question is, how do we convert our code into docs? How do we just do that? So here we go. Let's look at the structure of this project so we know what the dependencies are, can get a sense of what's going on here. We've got in the root README file. Let's close this. We've got our README file, that's what we're looking at here. We've got our tsconfig. So this is the configuration that tells TypeScript how to interpret stuff, how to compile stuff, all that. ESLint. So this is now where I have my lint rules. So you can see basically all of my rules in here, or almost all of them, are now about TypeScript. The ones that remain are actually mostly ones I don't need anymore because I've added prettier, but I had just added prettier and hadn't gone through the trouble of actually updating my ESLint configuration file to get rid of the things I don't care about anymore. So that's all that. So what we'll do first now is install this new plugin for ESLint and then get our ESLint-RC updated to properly make it go, where those new rules and the plugin that allows it to parse things properly is now going to apply to TSDoc. Let's try to figure out how to install this stuff. So let's see if this is a well-written documentation. Adding linter rules and things like Babel plugins, like all that stuff is always more confusing than you think it will be, because you do it rarely enough that it's not frequent enough for you to be like, oh yeah, I know exactly how this works. So what does this thing say to do? Install that. That's easy enough. First things first, let's install that. Okay, did it. That was easy. Next thing, ESLint config file. Add the ESLint plugin TSDoc package to our plugins field. Right, so that's all happening just in plugins. That's all we gotta do, supposedly. And then we're done. So that's cool. So the prettier docs recommend that you put stuff that isn't prettier before it. The idea being, I assume, that prettier now cleans up all the other stuff that's happening behind it. Since it's purely decorative, it doesn't actually functionally change things. Okay, now supposedly, our linter now has this plugin. All right, so we got our new ESLint rule. So supposedly, that's done. We can just sort of, cross this off the list, probably. Ooh, do we have to enable the TSDoc syntax rule? Okay, fine. So it would be weird if this wasn't just on by default with the plugin, but, hey, we'll do what they tell us. Avoid problems. So we're going to add that. So we've got this. Close that. Now we can install Typedoc. So we just have that ready to go, because we can just do a test run and just see what happens when we haven't even tried to do anything with it. So for that, we're going to do our little just another install. So here it's telling us to install it without that minus dash capital D, or as you can see up here, dash dash save dev. That's the same as single dash capital D. So they're having us install it without that, which means that this would be installed as a dependency, so that even users of this module, when they went to do an npm install at bscotch/utility, which is what this package publishes to, they'd end up installing Typedoc alongside it, which is probably not what we want. So we're going to do -D to make that go into dev config, or dev, whatever you call it, dev dependencies. And then, yes, dev dependencies, and there it is. Perfect. Now that we have installed Typedoc, it's now available locally. And what npx will do is if we try to run it, then it'll look for a thing called Typedoc in our locally installed executables. So that allowing us to just do npx Typedoc. So what I like to do anytime I install a new CLI is just run it with -h, just to see if it has a decent help. And then if that doesn't work, I'll try a -- help, because everybody does it slightly differently. And sometimes it's also just help without any dashes. But, you know, just go down the list, try the things. So this is nice. It gives us basically all of these options. It's hard to read in this context, so hopefully their documentation on their website is good, so we get nice formatting and, you know, highlighting and stuff. But it's nice to know that it's here. It tells us how to use it, gives us all the kinds of options for how it's going to work. Ooh, it tells us what language it can highlight. I don't know why, but I think it's actually because I believe you can document code, because I think you can use Markdown inside of TSDoc, and that will properly render. So that means that inside of that Markdown, inside of that JSDoc, you could have a code block and specify a language that isn't JavaScript or TypeScript, and apparently that's fine, and then it'll just syntax highlight anyway. I don't know why you would do that, but it's a thing that you could apparently do. You can see it also comes with some themes. So again, we can generate HTML with this, or we can generate JSON with this. If we generate HTML, then we also could choose from different themes. The themes are going to just apply different CSS. Presumably we could make our own theme if we wanted to, but who has the time? So we'll just pick one that looks good. Okay, cool. So now we've got everything installed. We have seen that there's decent help. So we're ready to try this thing out. So this whole Quickstart thing is something that I've seen in a lot of really good documentation, and I've been trying to model, which is given some project that you're hoping people will use, you sort of basically say, what is this for? Why is it useful? As succinctly as you can. Quickstart, get people just in the door, right? So you don't talk about the options, you don't talk about how it works, you don't talk about the caveats, you don't do any of that stuff. You just say, for most people, most of the time, if they do this tiny number of things, they won't necessarily get the outcome they want, but they'll get an outcome. So now they've started. They've got a sense of kind of how this thing works. And then they also have a sense of what didn't work the way they wanted it to. So as they start looking through the configuration, or sorry, the documentation, the deeper details of what the thing is that they're looking at and using, now they know what questions to ask. So here you can see how the code is organized. The way that I like to organize things for TypeScript projects is to have a source folder where all my TypeScript stuff is, because that way there's one compile step, one set of configuration. It's all very simple. And then it all exports into one build folder that just mimics that same layout. And so it's understandable if it weirds you out that I've got like source and I've got my test stuff and my non-test stuff, and the entry point is alongside test. Like this is all a little weird, but because of how publishing works with NPM, I can just exclude the test code from the published package so that the structure remains the same, just the tests aren't in there. So this allows for a really simple structure. It's easy for test code to access non-test code to test it. It's easy to find the entry point. Like everything's really easy to find. And then because you can control how it gets published, then it works out fine. So here's our entry point. You can see all this thing is doing, because like I said, this is a simple project and it's just a flat export. Just everything is just exported. It's just all right there. You can just grab all of it. So this is the entry point, and the question is, if we just run Typedoc on this, what do we get? Let's find out. npx Typedoc. One question is will it clobber my current README? Who cares? That's what Git's for. Okay, npx Typedoc, and then we'll point this to source/index.ts. That's pretty fast. Okay, I'm going to make another shell here just so that this stays up higher, so it's easier to see. Just kind of ignore the stuff down here. Okay, let's see what we got here. So now you can see a bunch of stuff got exported, but these are the things I changed, so I'm going to go ahead and just stage these to get them out of the way. So these are all the new things that have happened as a consequence of me running that command. So let's see what these are. So there's an index.html file that appeared. Actually, let's open this up here. Okay, cool. So this is all inside of a folder called docs. That feels like it makes sense. I can get behind that. So you can see it made an HTML file for index. So if you're unfamiliar with HTML, the standard way of naming an entry point for an HTML file is called index. Legacy reasons, but the cool thing that lets you do on most web servers is you can have a thing called index.html or .php or whatever. And then when you refer to a URL that doesn't have .html, because it's like referring to a folder basically on the server's file system, then if inside there's a file called index.html, that's what gets served. That isn't what has to happen. That's just become a convention. So it's kind of the default for a lot of things like Apache and stuff. And Node sort of inherited that same idea for its module management system. So this whole idea of like a file called index dot whatever the file type is really common. So here we've got this index file for this HTML. So now, here we go. Open with live server. So this is a cool extension that creates a local server and then runs your HTML through it so that you don't have to do the whole like, oh, where is my file so I can put file : / and then the full path to my file so my browser can show it nonsense. You get to treat the website basically you're building as a website. So you just go to some local host address, and so basically it creates a server on a port and just serves up your files from it. Okay, so this is cool. So this is what got generated without any options whatsoever. So let's try to figure out what it did here. So you'll notice there's some fun stuff going on here. This doesn't do anything to my code, at least public access. I don't have any classes. So there's no public protected stuff going on here yet. Though I still could probably mark different functions and stuff as public or private or whatever if I wanted to, so that while they're technically not, they wouldn't be documented, which is a classic JavaScript trick, because in JavaScript there's no such thing as private. Everything is public. And so there are tricks and conventions that people use, and then with JSDoc, and presumably TSDoc, you can use things like @private in your JSDoc to indicate that something is not supposed to be exposed, because again, it just is, because that's how JavaScript works. But by indicating that it's not, then the tools don't expose it. And so now, even though it's technically available, like somebody could use it, they could get in there, but they can't see that they can. So it's not a security mechanism, it's a mechanism to make sure that the API you intend to make visible and available is the one that people see. Okay, so what does this thing do? So it knew my title, right? And the only place that thing shows up is in my package.json, right? That's the name, which means that this thing reads the package.json. So that's good to know. It's pulling some information out of that. What else do we see? So now this is just my README file, right? So it looks like it makes the entry, or it makes the main page, the thing you land on, be the README file. So that's also great. So that means that if I want to write a bunch of, user-facing pros, so this kind of intro stuff, like, oh, here's how you install it, here's the quick launch, whatever. The stuff that isn't just the documentation for the code and how it works and for the API, but user-friendly tutorials and that kind of stuff, then I could still do that, and that would still show up first, which is great. And you can see it has the list of exports, with the idea being, because I gave it the entry point, and so the entry point then can follow all of the code that ends up being eventually exported out of it, and then reveal all of those things. So like I said, it's a flat project, so there's a lot of stuff in here. What is this thing? It's an interface. Okay, so I've got an export interface. Okay, so it separately handles interfaces and types. What do these icons mean? So this is a T, so it's a type. So this is my any function type. And then we've got this T with a 0 in front of it. Don't know what that means. Oh, it's a type type alias versus a type alias. It's the same thing. Okay, I don't know what that means. Okay, if anybody can figure that out, let me know. I have no idea what is that 0 doing? And so now we know what the default output looks. Again, it must look at the package.json. That's what it names this thing. So that's cool. It reads the README and then basically dumps that thing into here as the main view. So what we saw in here for the output is we have the index.html. Then we have this modules file. And so it looks like what happens here is that the entry point for this, we'll call it a website because it's got a couple pages. But anyway, here, it's probably takes us back to home. Yeah, so the home page is one index file that basically gives us our sidebar with all of our other modules. And then this other HTML file, appropriately called modules because that's what they're called in JavaScript. So a standalone file that exports something. And we can see here too that it also separately makes an interfaces folder. Interfaces are basically the shape of something like an object or whatever that is pseudo interchangeable with the word type, the concept of type in JavaScript. We won't really get into that, but you can think of them as basically being the same thing. And then we have just other assets like the CSS, images that it generates, I guess. And so this is cool because if we wanted to, we could then convert this into a website. We could actually even host that on GitHub. And so now all of a sudden, as part of our automated pipeline of versioning this thing, publishing it, and so on, we could have a website that is nicely hyperlinked and puts all the docs together. So that's pretty cool. I'm into it. So now if we go back and look at this thing, if we go back and look at this thing, what do we got? So now we have all of this stuff in here. Like I said, we've got these types. We have these, looks like probably these are referring to functions. I don't know what these icons mean. I can't figure this out. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. So these are objects, right? Because because this whole thing exports flat, I did add, oh, this is horrible. That's very hard to read. But I did add, here, we'll look at this in the code. So you can see what I did here is I'm exporting all these different functions. This was not exported. So I'm exporting all these different functions. And so these are making up those exported modules that are being displayed in the docs. Alongside that, I'm also exporting from each of these files. So I have each of these library files that contain functions related to that sort of class of thing. It's a loose hierarchy. A object that has all that stuff. The idea here being that if you wanted to import this thing directly, then you could get this, or if you this thing called array will basically be visible if you're using IntelliSense to figure out what's in here. So if you were like, oh, I just want array functions, you could basically import a thing called array, which is just this object, and now it's full of all the array functions. So it's basically adding two ways that a person could access the functions that make up the library. It's probably worth admitting that the only reason I'm doing this at all is for backwards compatibility, because until I fully had made the switch from JavaScript to TypeScript, I had always been exporting things in this way. And so now I'm just going to have to keep doing it for this project, which is, slightly annoying, but is what it is. So that's what that is, and it comes out as this just horrifying monstrosity of documentation. This is cool, though. This links me to the code. Ooh, cool. So this links me to in GitHub for the same Git commit. It links me to the thing it's documenting. So that is pretty cool. I do wish this documentation wasn't so hideous, because this is really hard to read, huh? I wonder if I can make that less hideous. So far, I don't know about this. Okay, so the point here is that we've got some hideous documentation because it's basically just taking the raw information, the raw like function declaration and stuff, and then just writing it out. No color highlighting, nothing. At least we got italics. That's nice. So it's just really hard to read. So having these docs isn't very helpful. At least the name is separate, so you can at least know what it is you're looking at. So the question is this thing classed in such a way that we can see its individual parts, which would then mean, oh cool, word breaks. Because if it is, then that means the CSS class could make it look nice. Signature symbol, signature type. Okay, yeah. So it doesn't say what the type is, but it tells us that it is a type, which means this could be classed, or could be styled via CSS to not look like crap. So, okay. In principle, we could make this look better. So I guess that's good to know. Presumably somebody's got some good themes out here. We would just have to dig. So, similar time. This is cool though. This is basically just already kind of the thing that I wanted it to be, right? Out of the gate, without setting any options, takes my README, gets my name, and then gives me documentation for all of my exported stuff. So if I were to now provide additional documentation, what's going to happen? So here, okay, so now this is interesting because now here, this is technically a TSDoc because it's a JSDoc and those are the same thing. So this documentation here should somehow be appearing. Which one is this? This is array sort numeric descending. Okay, and that shows up here. Nice. Yeah, look, cool. And then because I did a code sample here, so this is now Markdown, right? And so this section right here is a code block. And I've indicated that this is JavaScript because I could have said TypeScript, but by saying it's JavaScript, since people using this will also be using JavaScript, that it is a little more everyone friendly. But then it shows up in here. And it's also nicely syntax highlighted. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So these are types. What do these do? Okay, these are tag references. So if I were to slap like an alpha on that, what does that mean? What does that do? I assume, where does that go? Probably the bottom? I don't know. Where would that go? Alpha. Okay. So I could recompile this. I wonder if it has a watcher. It's fine if it has a watcher. Probably doesn't. Typedoc. Guides. Options. Watch. It does have a watcher. Yes. Preserve watch output. Clears the screen between compilation steps. Oh, yeah, let's not do that. Actually, who cares? I don't care what it's going to do. That's fine. Beautiful. Now I can change it, just have it change live for us, which is better. All right, so now that is rebuilt, what do we get? We get something that is upset. Okay. So, array truth compared to last. That's what we're looking at. Sort numeric, descending. Well, that's not very interesting. Okay, so it just sticks that on there. I think you might also get, let's see, so if we indicate this as alpha, we get hover text. Doesn't really do anything interesting for us either. Because there's also deprecated. Let's see what that does. So I got my watcher, recompiled. Excellent. This is a little inconvenient. I wish this was separate pages, but what are you going to do? What's this? Array sort numeric descending. That's all that does. Okay, does this annotate it in the... It doesn't annotate it in classes anywhere either. Okay. Oh, this is nice. Well, actually, that kind of sucks. So apparently even overload, only the first one shows the documentation. So that's less than ideal. Okay, good to know. What else we got? What else do we have? Example, experimental. So it looks like these things just kind of show up as like little tags in this context. Package information override, remarks, then C. Some remarks. Remarks. Okay, main documentation for an API item. Brief summary followed by detailed remarks. One or more. Detail pages show more. Okay, so it's sort of like an aside, I guess. Private remarks. Oh, cool, interesting. Throws, type param, virtuals, private, public, private. There's no add private. It's kind of weird. Internal. It's not planned to be used by third-party developers. Okay. And I think that's where some of these options come into play, where there's like exclude internal, exclude protected, all that kind of stuff. So that way you could say, again, even though it's technically available, I don't want that part of the API to be visible so that people don't use it and have bad things happen on accident. Okay, yeah. So I feel like we already kind of hit the extent of what this is going to do for us, which is not a bad thing necessarily. That means it's easy. That means out of the gate, it basically does what we want it to do, with some caveats and limitations. Notably, the main theme kind of blows. It makes it really hard to tell what, like this really needs some nice syntax highlighting. It's way too hard to read. So generics look bad. That's one lesson. Overloads don't document super well. It's not terrible, but it's not super good. Do these link to? No, it's just for this line. So return. It doesn't link to that type because that type isn't exported. So that's kind of a bummer. Okay, yeah. So anyway, so there's some caveats here, but it still seems like if I went into my README and I took all the documentation out of my README, which is basically like, here's how to import this thing, have some examples on how to use different ones, and then move that into just the functions themselves, and now everything is inline. It's all alongside the functions. If I change or add a function, I can just add stuff there, and it'll just then appear where it needs to. And then the README file can be restricted to just being basically a description of what this project is, and some sort of a quick start process. Okay, that's not bad. I think that's okay. I can get behind that. You could check out what it shows as Markdown. Actually, that's a fair point, because it already is. So this is Phantasmic asks or says, what does it do with Markdown? Let's find out. So let us first just see what happens without the plugin. So now let's take one of these documents I have in here. Let's look at some of these string functions. Okay, so let's look at like these fun template functions. And then we can go into our strings library, subset library, and then we can annotate these things. So, okay, so this thing's already annotated. So if we look at undent, then that should just be the summary. Undent, QRSTU, undent. Yep, there's a summary. Great, perfect. So now if we take right here. So if we take this example here, then we can add some more markdown to it, but this should render the way we would want it to. So now we have this annoyance, but that is something we can deal with. There we go. Okay, but this is a code block, so let's mark that off. JS. These are comments that are supposed to show up inside the code block. So let's mark that off. Okay, so that's the idea of like migrate the README documentation into the actual code documentation. So if we refresh that, does it not exist anymore? Can I not go there? Okay, so that works properly. Now, what if we scream out the name of this thing? Undent. And then let's like throw a dang image in here, huh? Let's put like, oh crap, what's the URL just to some random image? Let's see if I can remember these. /bscotch, no, image.bscotch.net /fit in /256 by 256 logos studio.png. Is that one of them? I feel like that's going to be, I think that's a real one. Actually, let's check it in the browser. I have a what's the right word for that? I have a thing set up on AWS that we can host all of our images at their original resolution, the original scale, and then we can generate arbitrary URLs to that same content, and then the image of the specified size gets created on the fly and cached. So the next person who requests it gets an image of that same size that's now already been created, so that way we minimize bandwidth. But that same thing can also be used to, so this is the human readable version where you can kind of control its size, and that's really it. But the other thing that is, it's actually using a thing called, oh crap, what is that? Node image processing. I can't remember, it starts with an S, I think. Sharp, that's the one. So if you're into Node, so Node doesn't quite have the extensive sort of file manipulation and like data manipulation library stuff that like Python has. Not even close, really, but it does have some particularly good stuff. And so one of those is image. Well, I guess not a lot of image libraries, but a few pretty good ones, including Sharp, which is probably my favorite one. It's very easy to use, very human friendly. Their documentation is stellar, and it allows you basically to just take an image and then you can chain commands to do stuff to it and spit out a new image. So basically what is happening at AWS is that it uses the source, the raw original image, and then just chains a bunch of things together. And the cool thing is you can compose those in your URL, right? So you basically can make a JSON document that describes like my resize parameters, I want to change it to grayscale, I want to convert it to a JPEG, I want to crop it, I want to rotate it, like whatever. Any manipulation that Sharp can do, you can just describe in a JSON document, and then you basically base64 encode that, use it as a URL with some information about what image it's referring to and stuff, and then it does all that on the fly, returns that image, and then caches it. So it caches it with that same URL, so the next person who asks for that same weird thing gets the same deal. So I can show you that if we go to our website. So if we look at the URL this thing is requesting, like look at this weird URL, right? It's like slash. So those of you who do a lot of base64 and like data stuff, like if you see EY capital J, you're like, I know what that is. That's JSON. Because when you base64 encode JSON, the first character is always a left curly bracket, and the next character is always a double quote. And so what you basically always end up with is lowercase e, lowercase y, and a capital J because of that requirement. Not important, but just kind of interesting. Anyway, so you can see I got this long thing. If we took this and then went to like a base64 decoder and looked at what it was. Now, where's my decoder? Decode. I have to click it. It's not just live. So look at that. It just describes what I want it to look like. And boom. Now I got it. So anyway, that's pretty cool. So that's how we handle dynamic resizing, so that when you visit our website using some particular browser, so if you're on a phone versus on a desktop or on an ultra-wide or whatever, or Safari, which doesn't support certain file types, although I think they recently just finally started supporting WebP. There's a newer one that they also don't support now, but thus is the Webdev game. And so what that allows the website to do is to have all of these fallbacks where it can formulate a new URL based on the size and pixel density of the browser it's asking for it, and also based on what file types it supports. That way people get what they need at decent bandwidths, which helps us. And they also get it in a way that is likely to look pretty good because it matches pixel density on their phone or desktop or whatever. Anyway, so long story to say that URL works. So never make an image in HTML or Markdown without alt text. Just don't do it. It's against the rules. Bscotch, Studio, logo. Even though we're just playing here, still just always do. It's a good habit. Okay, so now we got an image. So HTML is Markdown. So let's just see what happens. Let's just see if we, I guess depending on how sanitized it is, I guess we'll find out. So we'll put something in here like, this is italics. We'll just state effect. And then we'll say, so is this. I could put some bold stuff in here, but this is bold, supposedly. We could put a list in here of some sort. Here's the list item. Maybe we'll put a quote in here of some sort. Put a quote in here that says something like, Typedoc is great. Abraham Lincoln, 2099. It's future Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so unfortunately we can't get any syntax highlighting here. Moonwatcher suggests trying actual script in here. So if they're not sanitizing that out, that would be hilarious. But you know what? Let's try it. Why not? Well, yeah, we'll do an alert so it actually pops up. That's fine. Go. All right, let's see what this does. Watching, recompiling. Perfect. What do we got? What do we got? Where are we at here? Let's close that, close that, close that. Refresh this. Oh my God, it lets you do it. We could just run JavaScript in here. Okay. I mean, that's not necessarily bad because the person controlling the JavaScript is the person writing the docs, so it's not necessarily a security issue. But it is hilarious. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Okay, so why does it even say we would need a plugin? Because it just uses it. Separate out the files. Yeah, why do we even need that? GitHub wiki theme. What is this? Is this if you wanted to like control how the markdown behaved or something? I don't really know. It looks like it just already supports it. Oh, that's cool. So you could do really weird stuff with this. Interesting. Yeah. When Moonwatcher suggested putting that script tag on there, I was like, this isn't going to work, but sure. But you can just do it. That means we could literally load, like you could load like you could make a single page app inside of this documentation, like I could load view and then create a view object that does stuff. Right? I mean, I don't know why I would, but I could do that. Well, that is, I'm going to try it. We're going to try it. Vue.js. Vue is like I mentioned earlier, when you're setting up a thing, even if you feel fairly familiar with it, if you very rarely actually do the setup phase, then every time you do it, you're just like, you feel like an idiot because you don't know how to actually do it. Fortunately, it probably could do it in a few little steps. It's probably easy. Because I should be able just to do it inside of, without doing any installs, so I should just be able to use a script tag to load Vue. This isn't helping me at all. Install. That's not what I want to do. There we go. CDN. Yeah, so I should just be able to grab it. Let's get Vue 3. Oh, no, this is Vue 2 docs. Vue 3. So I just recently updated Rumpus, the Rumpus website, to use Vue 3. So I'm still kind of figuring out how to think about that. What's taking you so long, buddy? There we go. There we go. Okay, Vue installation. There we go. So I can just basically load Vue in here. I can just load Vue. And then, so let's do that. Slap some Vue in here. Okay, but then I would need to be able to now put some sort of a container in here that I can stick something into. Okay, so let's make a container. We'll just call this, we'll make a section. That's a nice generic container. We'll give it an ID. We'll say this thing's ID is, we'll just call it app. That's your kind of classic Vue/React thing to do. That's it. So now we got a mount point. So that's great. Now I can make another script that actually sort of writing JavaScript inside our Markdown, inside our TypeScript. Okay, so I use the whole build process for this, so I can't remember how to actually do it without the build process, but I should just be able to plug a thing in there, just like inject it. If you create app, yeah, there we go, because I can just make a template and I can shove it in there. I can tell it where I want it to go. This requires a compiler, this does not. Could I just try to render a thing? Return view. Right, because if it's a template, you have to do the compiling step. Okay. Can I do this? Can I figure out how to do this? How would I do it? So do template syntax inside of, right, because it's now if I'm going to be compiling though. I've never used Vue without the compile step. Can I just do it? Here we go. Actually, let's look at CodePen. CodePen. So if we look at CodePen, and then we make a Vue pen. How do they do it? We just look what they did. Oh no, they still do a single. Oh crap. Okay, so that's still compiled. Okay, so that didn't do it. I know you can do it without compiling. How do you do it? Single file components. Testing, scaling up, routing, basics. How do I do it? Vue 3 render template out compile. How do we do it? Render functions. Template compilation. Without Webpack. So here we go. Maybe. No, it's still doing. Oh, yeah, sorry, it's just looking at this JavaScript, which is also over there, so that's fine. So, right, then we use a module syntax for that to work. So then it imports app, but that's if we have that there. Okay, crap. All right, I don't know enough about using Vue without a compile step to do this in an effective way, so that's a bummer. Just burning time, but we probably could though, you know? Probably could. Go to the intro page, somebody says. Was it in there somewhere? Is there something about Vue.js intro page? Does it show me? Wait, is that all I have to do? That can't be right. Can it? Is that right? Because that sounds absurd. Right, because then this thing should expose a global called view, if this works. And then So that gets loaded, which allows this thing to go, if this is all behaving, and assuming the synchronicity stuff behaves the way we would think. It's looking for an element with an ID of app that exists, supposedly. And then it's injecting some data called message into it, which I'm not actually using. Wait, can I just put a template syntax in here? Can I just do that? Because that's what that looks like for compiled stuff. Is it the same? Is it the same? Okay. Undent. Where's that here? Undent. There it is. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. As in, didn't work. DVD app. Right, because I still... Because it's creating a new view instance. And then it's supposed to insert it in there. Now, is this just a synchronicity issue? So if we go to console here, what do we see? View is not a constructor. Yeah, it's not available. But it says it's supposed to be there. Is it just because we need to import view? Is that all it is? Yeah, clearly the fact that I never do just raw coding for websites means I don't know anything. Import view from view. Because this is now assuming that this thing is going to behave. This is now we have to take this type equals module. Is that how you do it? Does anybody know how any of this works? I have no idea. Wait, who says I saw something about view.h? This is not for Ludum Dare. This is just me doing. I'm the web developer for Bscotch. I'm just doing weird stuff. Seth, I believe, is going to be doing a Ludum Dare stream. I think that's next week. 2 weekends. 2 weekends. Is that right? So 13th. Yeah, so I think it's 2 weekends. So he claimed that he was going to, and I think he even said it on the podcast. So if that's the case, then I think he has to hold himself to it. You know. If he didn't say that out loud to people besides us, then whoops, I guess. April 23rd, yeah, so 2 weeks. Yep. All right, this view stuff is something I'll just have to play with at a later date because it's already past my intended end time for this thing. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this was interesting, useful, and or entertaining to some extent. This is some pretty, nerdy stuff. I appreciate everyone who's willing to spend an evening with me watching me learn about documentation of TypeScript. That is, that's pretty specific. So yeah, I would love for you to share with me any cool documentation tricks you come up with, especially if it's TypeScript and JavaScript, since that's where I'm doing stuff. So we've got our Discord for the studio, which is at discord.gg/bscotch. So you can come in, say hi, tell me stuff. You can tweet at me at costerad. I think there's a link somewhere in this thing. I don't know. Somewhere on Twitch, there's a link for that. And yeah, if you've learned any things or want to show me that you figured out how to get view working inside the comments of TSDoc, that'd be cool. I'd be into that. But yeah, so thanks for coming by. Omnicar, welcome. Came at 6:30 PST instead of CST. Yep, that's bad timing. That's now. So, right? Isn't that now? Yes, because you're 2 hours behind. Yeah. So, whoops. I know I definitely put CST though. In everywhere I put it. So I can't take any blame for that. Yeah, Ribdot, thanks for coming. Smallgram, ask, doing your stream on the conventional changelog tool. Yeah, actually, I would like to. I haven't actually done anything with it since that stream. So I still want to do that. That is the tool that I want to make. Before I did it, though, because I had this question of, can I improve the documentation process so that it's just simpler? Because if I already knew that ahead of time, then I could just take advantage of that with that project. So that was a lot of why I was doing this for this one. Ablewell Tipplwick, which sounds It's just a lot like a Rumpus username, but maybe it's at some other source. Was adequately whelmed. That's exactly what I'm going for. You know, don't want to hit under, don't want to hit over. It's too much. Just we want to avoid those extremes. Go right for the whelm. What else we got here? Might have missed some other stuff. Take a quick check. Yeah, that looks like that kind of sums it up. Moonwatcher said, suggested try logging view in the console. Good idea. Yeah, I should do some console exploration and see where does view show up when you just load it. But there's also, when it comes to HTML loading scripts, by default, they don't load as modules. They load basically in global scope. But it's possible that the view, whatever it is coming from the CDN, it's possible that thing is a module. And so in order to access it, I would need to identify it as a module and then also use import syntax in the part that, I don't know. It's going to require some playing to figure that out. But yeah, anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm going to shut this thing down and hope that I see you again. Say hi. Say hi on Twitter. Say hi on Discord. Whatever it is that you feel like saying hi. If you're into this kind of nerd stuff, there's I think you can get alerts when the stream goes live. And again, Seth will be streaming also in a couple weekends, doing game maker stuff, doing game dev. I also have a newsletter that I've been doing that's also just weird, nerdy stuff. A lot of TypeScript, a lot of web dev. So if you're into that kind of thing, you can go to tinybs.co/devchat. Tinybs.co is a URL shortener I made that just links to all of our stuff. So, that's fun. That could be another thing we could do at some point. Talk about how does that work. That's it. So Smallgrim says, love the newsletter. Appreciate that. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I've been having a lot of fun writing it. Yeah, everybody, just have a great evening and get some sleep, probably, depending on your time zone. Yeah? Right. Bye, everyone. So here, okay, so now this is interesting because now here, this is technically a TSDoc because it's a JSDoc and those are the same thing. So this documentation here should somehow be appearing. Which one is this? This is array sort numeric descending. Okay, and that shows up here. Nice. Yeah, look, cool. And then because I did a code sample here, so this is now markdown, right? And so this section right here is a code block. And I've indicated that this is JavaScript because I could have said TypeScript, but by saying it's JavaScript, since people using this will also be using JavaScript, that it is a little more everyone friendly. But then it shows up in here. And it's also nicely syntax highlighted. So if I were to slap like an alpha on that, what does that mean? What does that do? I assume, where does that go? Probably the bottom? I don't know. Where would that go? Alpha. Okay. So I can recompile this. I wonder if it has a watcher. Let's find out if it has a watcher. Options. Watch. It does have a watcher. Yes. Preserve watch output. Clears the screen between compilation steps. Oh, yeah, let's not do that. Actually, who cares? I don't care what it's going to do. That's fine. Beautiful. Now I can change it, just have it change live for us, which is better. Now that is rebuilt. What do we get? We get something that is upset. Sort numeric. Descending. Well, that's not very interesting. Okay, so it just sticks that on there. Because there's also deprecated. Let's see what that does. So I got my watcher. That's all that does. Okay, does this annotate it in the... It doesn't annotate it in classes anywhere either. So apparently if you have an overload, only the first one shows the documentation. So that's less than ideal. Okay, good to know. What else we got? What else do we have? example, experimental. So it looks like these things just kind of show up as like little tags in this context. Package information override, remarks. Remarks. Okay, main documentation for an API item. Brief summary followed by detailed remarks. So it's sort of like an aside, I guess. Internal. It's not planned to be used by third-party developers. Okay. And I think that's where some of these options come into play, where there's like exclude internal, exclude protected, all that kind of stuff. So that way you could say, again, even though it's technically available, I don't want that part of the API to be visible so that people don't use it. So I feel like we already kind of hit the extent of what this is going to do for us, which is not a bad thing necessarily. That means it's easy. That means out of the gate, it basically does what we want it to do, with some caveats and limitations. Notably, the main theme kind of blows. It makes it really hard to tell what, like this really needs some nice syntax highlighting. It's way too hard to read. So generics look bad. That's one lesson. Overloads don't document super well. So return, it doesn't like that type because that type isn't exported. So that's kind of a bummer. So now if I went into my README and I took all the documentation out of my README, which is basically like, here's how to import this thing, have some examples on how to use different ones, and then move that into just the functions themselves, and now everything is inline, it's all alongside the functions. If I change or add a function, I can just add stuff there, and it'll just then appear where it needs to. And then the README file can be restricted to just being basically a description of what this project is. You could check out what it shows as Markdown. Actually, that's a fair point, because it already is. So this is Phantasmic asks, or says, what does it do with Markdown? Let's find out. So let us first just see what happens without the plugin. So now let's take one of these documents I have in here. Let's look at some of these string functions. Okay, so let's look at like these fun template functions. And then we can go into our strings library, the subset library, and then we can annotate these things. So, okay, so this thing's already annotated. So if we look at undent, then that should just be the summary. Undent, QRSTU, undent. There's a summary. Great. Perfect. If we take this example here, then we can add some more markdown to it, but this should render the way we would want it to. So now we have this annoyance, but that is something we can deal with. Okay, but this is a code block, so let's mark that off. Okay, so that's the idea of like migrate the README documentation into the actual code documentation. Okay, so that works properly. Now, what if we scream out the name of this thing, undent, and then let's throw a dang image in here. //bscotch, no, image.bscotch.net /fit in /256 by 256 logos studio.png. Never make an image in HTML or Markdown without alt text. Just don't do it. It's against the rules. Bscotch studio logo, even though we're just playing here. Still just always do. It's a good habit. So HTML is Markdown. So, let's just see what happens. Let's just see if I guess depending on how sanitized it is, I guess we'll find out. So we'll put something in here like, this is italics. We'll just state a fact. And then we'll say, so is this. I could put some bold stuff in here, but this is bold, supposedly. We could put a list in here of some sort. Here's a list item. Maybe we'll put a quote in here of some sort. Typedoc is great. Abraham Lincoln. future Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so unfortunately we can't get any syntax highlighting here. Moonwatcher suggests trying actual script in here. So if they're not sanitizing that out, that would be hilarious. But you know what? Let's try it. Why not? Well, yeah, we'll do an alert so it actually pops up. That's fine. Go. All right, let's see what this does. Watching, recompiling. Perfect. What do we got? Oh my God, it lets you do it. We could just run JavaScript in here. Okay. I mean, that's not necessarily bad because the person controlling the JavaScript is the person writing the docs, so it's not necessarily a security issue. But it is hilarious. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Okay, so why does it even say we would need a plugin? Because it just uses it. Yeah, why would we even need that? So you could do really weird stuff with this. You know, that means we could literally load, like you could load like you could make a single page app inside of this documentation, you know, like I could load view and then create a view object that does stuff. All right, this view stuff is something I'll just have to play with at a later date. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this was interesting, useful, and or entertaining to some extent. This is some pretty, you know, nerdy stuff. I appreciate everyone who's willing to spend an evening with me watching me learn about documentation of TypeScript. That is, that's pretty specific. So yeah, I would love for you to share with me any cool documentation tricks you come up with, especially if it's TypeScript and JavaScript, since that's, you know, where I'm doing stuff. So we've got our Discord for the studio, which is at discord.gg/bscotch. So you can come in, say hi, tell me stuff. You can tweet at me at costerad. I think there's a link somewhere in this thing. I don't know. Somewhere on Twitch, there's a link for that. And yeah, if you've learned any things or want to show me that you figured out how to get view working inside the comments of TSDoc, that'd be cool. I'd be into that. But yeah, anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm going to shut this thing down and hope that I see you again. Again, say hi. Say hi on Twitter. Say hi on Discord. Whatever it is that you feel like saying hi. If you're into this kind of nerd stuff, there's I think you can get alerts when the stream goes live. And again, Seth will be streaming also in a couple weekends, doing game maker stuff, doing game dev. I also have a newsletter that I've been doing that's also just weird nerdy stuff. A lot of TypeScript, a lot of web dev. So if you're into that kind of thing, you can go to tinybs.co/devchat. tinybs.co is a URL shortener I made that just links to all of our stuff. So, you know, that's fun. That could be another thing we could do at some point. Talk about how does that work. That's it. So Smallgrim says, love the newsletter. Appreciate that. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I've been having a lot of fun writing it. Yeah, everybody, just have a great evening and get some sleep probably, depending on your time zone.